As far as visual design goes, the book that I find most useful is called Presentation Zen. There's a copy in the library. We have one at the Writing Center. It's the shortest and the best. It's less than $20 on Amazon if you need to get a copy. So what belongs on a slide? I think I've just kind of given you a hint of what I think doesn't belong on a slide. Seth Godin says no more than 6 words on a slide ever, which I have violated with this slide. I think he's right, though. I mean, you've all seen presentations where somebody has paragraphs and paragraphs of text up on the slide. Nobody can read it from the back of the room, maybe not even from the front of the room. And furthermore, you don't want to be reading it when there's someone up there also talking at you from the front of the room. You're trying to divide your attention. Charts that clearly show the point that you want to make and nothing else are great to put on a slide. I'm going to show you some really bad examples of charts. Photos, images that evoke the concept you want to get across or the feeling you want to instill. In this case, Zen. You might find one that does excitement. Okay, things that do not belong on a slide. Your entire data set, no. This is a Microsoft slide. This was actually presented in one of their like product introduction things. As many bullet points as they could possibly get on this slide, and they're not even like regular text bullets. They're all logos, and they're all different logos. Like each one of these could be a slide, and it would still be busy. Clip art. Please stay away from the clip art. This is just, it's juvenile. It doesn't look professional. It does not convey anything. It's just filler. Ditch it. The author of Presentation Zen, his name is Gar Reynolds. He coined this word called Youmans, and it's slides that are documents thrown up onto a screen. Don't do that. Separate what you want your audience to have. There are things that they need to be looking at in the room, and then there are things that can be printed that you give them to take away. And we've given you a whole binder full of them. You know, we didn't try to put all of that information up here. We hand it to you. There's a difference between a slide and a document. They should not be the same thing. And then ask yourself, do you even need slides? Jennifer didn't this morning. We went with one slide for like the first hour and a half that you were talking. It was great. We had a great discussion, didn't we? Didn't need slides. Ask yourself, can I just get up in front of people and talk about this subject, or am I hiding behind my visuals? The B key in both PowerPoint and Keynote. You can press the B key while you're presenting and go to a plain black screen. So you don't have to create filler. Isn't that a great trick? I love it. And some remotes even have a button for that too. You don't have to create filler slides if there's no visual that's appropriate to what you're saying. Just let it go black. So I see a lot of people sort of throw up filler visuals when they don't have anything that's appropriate to the topic that they're speaking on, and you can just let it go. Don't feel the need to fill. This is a great quote. I'm going to read you this story. This is out of another book called The Naked Presenter, which is all about speaking without slides. And this is from Guy Kawasaki, who's a very popular speaker in the tech field. He says, look, if you need to put 8-point or 10-point fonts up on your slides, it's because you don't know your material. And if you start reading your material because you don't know your material, your audience is very quickly going to think that you are a bozo. They're going to say to themselves, this bozo is reading his slides. I can read faster than this bozo can speak. I will just read ahead. And I think this speaks to the attention span problems that we see in some classrooms and some presentations. It's not just that we have shorter attention spans in all cases. It's sometimes we're sitting up here reading the information off the slide, which they've processed 2 minutes ago and are now moving on to something else because we're boring them. So let's assume that you do need some slides. If you're not just going to read things off your screen, you're going to have to do some planning. Think about what's best going to illustrate your points. And don't just open up the application and start entering bullets, which is what I see a lot of students doing. No, 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 no. That's letting the software dictate what you're doing. Sketch some things on paper or a whiteboard. This person has highlighted the important points. Those are the things that are probably going to need to be on the slide. This other stuff can maybe go into a handout or can go into the speaker's notes or something like that. There's a slide sorter view, which is, in Keynote it's called the slide sorter. In PowerPoint it's called the light table. This is the one where you can move the slides around in a big grid. And you can use this to sort of create title slides for your sort of subject headings. and then fill in with the other slides that you're going to use to illustrate those points. And it'll let you create, you can insert blank slides until you're ready to fill them in. You can print 6 blank slides on a page from PowerPoint. I do that a lot when I want to sketch things out on paper. I'll just print a stack of blank slides, 6 to a page, and start filling in the boxes. You can also do this with Post-it notes on a wall. Anything that lets you move things around is going to work for this. But you want to plan the whole thing before you get into the software. Because the software is going to teach you bad layout decisions. This is a sample title slide from one of the default PowerPoint themes. It's one of the better PowerPoint themes. And it's still not very good, in my opinion, because look at the contrast here. This is like calling attention to itself down here. And whatever you put here is going to be fighting for the attention that is down here. This is drawing your eye this way. And here's the body slide from the same theme. Again, a huge amount of space is given to the title area. That doesn't really leave you a whole lot of room to do your thing, especially given what I'm going to show you in a minute about the bottom of the screen. But it also has this incredibly high contrast design. Your information is going to get lost on this slide. You know, you don't need a fussy background. You can go with a solid color or a gentle gradient or a really, really subtle pattern or a solid color. In a situation where you're going to be speaking in a dark room, I would go with a dark or a black background. In a situation where it's really bright, white is okay. In a dark room, this would be completely blinding to the audience. I always try to figure out what is the light situation going to be. I don't want to completely, blind people. They look like moles emerging from the dark when they see one of these. Keep in mind that unless they're sitting in the very front of the room, everybody's going to be looking at your slides over several people's heads. Don't put anything vital in the bottom 15, 20% of your slide area, because there's a good chance that about half your audience at least is not going to be able to see it. You are designing for the back of the room. Not only is your slide not a document, it needs to be a billboard. I can't even read that in this picture, and this is a fairly good camera. I can read the title, but that's it. The rest of it, no. How large should your text be? Figure out the average age of your audience, roughly, and divide by 2. In this case, I would say about 45. Some good fonts to use are the really simple ones that are installed on every computer. Caslon, Franklin Gothic. Garamond is the one that you see in a lot of Apple presentations. That's a pretty good one. Helvetica is the old standby. What you don't want are the fonts that have a really broad stroke in one direction and a really thin one in another, because those thin ones will disappear. And the broad ones will take over. Also, these openings, the counters in the letters, have to be big enough that they don't get lost in the light, because these kind of glow a little bit. The letters are a little bit fuzzy on a very large screen. Rockwell's not bad. I would say this one is right on the edge of what I would use in a presentation, because those serifs are awfully strong and they start to run together a bit right in the middle. I really recommend using one font for your entire presentation. I know people get a little crazy because they have 60 of them installed on the machine by default and like, I can use all of these different fonts. Generally not a good idea. You only need really color and positioning and spacing and size to demonstrate your hierarchy of information. You don't have to go with 15 different fonts, and it's much more readable if you don't have problems with your drop shadows on Windows versus Mac, and if you stick with one font. This is Steve Jobs' presentation. The reason I named him when we were talking about people we admire as speakers is because I've been looking at tons of his stuff while doing this. Even when his slide is full of bullet points, there are no bullets. He's using the spacing to take care of the differentiation. We don't need bullet points on this screen. And furthermore, he's given you more than just text to look at. He's showing you the shiny thing that he's trying to sell you as he's giving you the technical details about it. So if you don't care about the technical stuff, you can still go, ooh, ah. This is from the introduction of the most recent iPhone update. This is a color wheel from Before and After magazine, which is one of the resources on your sheet, which is, by the way, the very last thing in your binder. The trick to using these colors effectively, there's a lot of tricks really. I'm not going to go into the whole psychology of color and how different colors create different moods, because I think that's really less important than some of these other subjects when it comes to slides. We can talk about how blue is calming and red is exciting and green can represent either life and freshness or illness and death, depending on which shade you use. Really what I'm interested in as far as slide design goes is contrast. This is pretty high contrast. We got dark, we got light. There's a drop shadow on it, which helps. Pops it a little bit. Not so much contrast. The colors go together. They look good together, but it doesn't pop out into the room the way the other one did. Adding a drop shadow doesn't help all that much. Now that's bright. That's polar opposites. It might even be too much. It might get a kind of, it might start to give you a little bit of a headache looking at these two colors, you know, on top of each other, because they are exact opposites on the color wheel. So what you kind of want to do is find the opposite, because that's going to be the thing that, you know, pops out, but then back it down a little bit. Go to a very light yellow or white even, or try one of the colors that are next to it, orange or maybe the sort of mustardy color. I'm going to kind of move on and fold in some information about the color as we talk about charts, because I think charts and graphs are some of the most problematic things that we see on slides, other than, you know, giant paragraphs of text. And the idea that I want to get across here is that this distorts the data. If you can avoid those 3D constructions, they look cool and they're all the defaults, but a flat chart shows much better. You can imagine if this is sloped and you're seeing it on a perspective, that 23% shrinks quite a bit. Showing it flat gives you a much more accurate representation of the data. This is slightly cleaned up from what pasted in from Excel. It originally put all of the text at 10 point, I think, which was ridiculously small. This is one of the default color schemes that it sort of didn't give me much of a choice about. And so I've got white on a very bright color that you really can't read very well. I mean, I'm going to start cleaning this up a little bit. So my first attempt is just to fix the fonts. That's still not great. We've got better contrast, but this still looks pretty bad. Changing the color scheme completely and moving those labels out helps quite a bit. And now that I have the labels here, I don't need a separate legend. Now this is better if what I'm trying to point out to you is the Latin American number. I'm pulling that one thing out of the chart, fading the rest out into very similar colors that are also fairly similar to the slide itself. That number really pops now. I could try this. Not sure I'm loving the yellow, but this is our contrast at work again. What I did want to point out was a very subtle color change. Watch the text on Latin America versus this pie chart. It's very, very similar shades of yellow versus the identical shade. This is a trick from web design that I wanted to share with you. If you have text that is supposed to match something else on the screen, the bit of text usually looks darker than the big chunk of color, even though it's technically the same shade. So if you want it to look the same, lighten the text just a smidge. So text tends to look darker when it's the same color, and this is one of those little tricks from the web design world that I wanted to bring in and kind of show you all. This is another chart from Excel, and in fact I cleaned this up a bit from what it pasted in. It's not great. The original one had really different fonts and a blinding white background, which I took out. What I want to get across for you and for your students is that working with graphs is typically a question of taking things out that PowerPoint and Excel have put in for you, thinking that it's going to be wonderful. You don't need everything here. Let's start removing the non-essentials. Since we just have one data series, we don't need a legend. Nor do we really need a y-axis. It's pretty clear. We know that 4 is bigger than 3.65. We can dim these grid lines a little bit, or we can get rid of them altogether. This is starting to look a lot better. Now we don't really need this big border around the whole thing, and we can even dim this one that we have left. That's not too bad. I think the numbers are still kind of hard to read, so let's move them a little bit and maybe increase the final point that we want to make. All of that was just a question of deleting the stuff that PowerPoint had put in there and backing out until we have absolutely nothing left that is not essential. Of course, we have to decide if a graph is really the best way to convey this information. Maybe not. Let me talk about images for a minute. Obviously, clip art, very bad. None of this. Let's talk about photos. A lot of the sort of default photo or slide layouts will have these little frames that they have borders and they tilt the photo a little bit, and that's okay, but it necessarily diminishes the photo, whereas if you get it full screen, you can really tell how in your face Elena was being when I took this picture, right? She was like right up in my iPhone and I went, click. Which one gives you a better idea of her personality? This one, right? Stock photos are great, and there's a whole list of places that you can get them. But there are different ways of illustrating the same concept. And so if you have the choice between a complicated photo and a simple one, which one brings that closer and makes you feel like you're part of that game? I think it's this one. And certainly if I had text to superimpose on it, I would want to do it here rather than try to cover up the player's face. It's the same concept. It just brings it a little bit closer. Special effects. I have no use for most of the transitions that are built into PowerPoint and Keynote both. They're completely pointless. Animation calls attention to itself. It does not call attention necessarily to your data. It's a distraction. But I do think there's one effective use of it. So here we're using a nice little photo to illustrate the 5-year difference in the life expectancy of men and women. I'm just going to fade him out. And is that not evocative? It's so sad. You're like, she's all alone. All I did was take an eraser in Photoshop and get him out and sort of like move the water over a little bit. This does require a little skill with Photoshop. It's maybe not something you would do every day for a lecture, but it's an interesting technique. And I think this is probably one of the only legitimate uses for a transition in slide software. It's just a simple fade. I had 2 photos, one with him, one without, and I set up a fade between the 2. Those silly little like tiles that come falling down from one side and go this way, I have no patience for that stuff. It's just a distraction. It's taking away from your data. So let's think about this chart again. Is this the best way to illustrate the decline in the birth rate from 1950 to 2010? Maybe. Or maybe we do something similar where we say, in 1950 everybody was having 3 kids, and now they're having 1. Again, that takes some time in Photoshop. For me, about 15 minutes, but then I've been using Photoshop for 10 years. So this is one of those more advanced techniques. It depends on the skill level of the person that you're working with. I might choose a simpler image, especially if I had some sort of qualitative data. Maybe I have a survey that says, we've talked to women to find out why they're not having more children, and more of them are saying that they feel pressured to focus on their careers before they have kids. And so then they might have trouble conceiving later, or they might feel that they don't have time to have more than one baby. And so, we have women who are becoming new mothers at an older age and just have 1 child. And that look on her face kind of might make you feel, oh, maybe she wanted more. So yeah, one simple evocative photo might do the trick, rather than having to deal with these more complex Photoshop transitions. It really comes down to what is essential. Don't put anything on the screen that is not essential. I have this wonderful story from Presentation Zen. It's called The Fish Story. This is a letter that the author got from one of his readers. He says, when you talked about reducing the text on the slides, I was reminded of a story from my childhood in India. And it says, if I remember it right, it goes like this. It says, when Vijay opened his store, he put up a sign that says, we sell fresh fish here. His father stopped by and said that the word we suggests an emphasis on the seller rather than the customer and is not needed. And so the sign was changed to fresh fish sold here. His brother came by and suggested that the word here could be done away with. It was superfluous. Vijay agreed and changed the sign to fresh fish sold. Next, his sister came along and said the sign should just say fresh fish. Clearly it's being sold. What else would you be doing with, a building full of fish? Then his neighbor stopped by to congratulate him and mentioned that all the passers-by could easily tell that the fish was really fresh. And mentioning the word fresh actually made it sound defensive, as though there was some room for doubt about the freshness. And so he changed the sign to just say fish. And as he was walking back to the shop after a break, he noticed that one could really identify the fish from its smell very far away. And at a distance, one could barely read the sign. And he knew that there was no need for the word fish. I love the fish story. It's all about taking things away until there's nothing left that you can take away. That's art. That's graphic design. It applies to everything. Slides, the web, posters, research posters, billboards. It's all the same thing. You're trying to hold on to people's attention while they're busy doing other things. Don't let the software dictate your choices. You are the master. You are the one with the opposable thumbs. You can do this. Take away all the stuff that it throws you. Don't start with its little templates. Do what you need to do and nothing more. Are there any questions? Do we want to talk about visuals? No, I don't just go to Google and start, searching Google image search, because that stuff is copyrighted. It's not mine. The stock photo sites have their license terms kind of explicitly laid out and say these are the things that you can do with our photos and these are the things that you can't. With iStock Photo, unless it's one of the free photos of the day, you're going to have to pay a little bit of money for those. And so I didn't use any iStock Photo for this one. But it is a great site. They're pretty cheap. I think it runs about $1 a photo for some of the lower resolution ones. And if you want to use the much higher resolution for some sort of print purpose, you can buy a more expensive copy of the photo. But the licensing terms will lay out what you are allowed to do with it and what you're not. Flickr has a Creative Commons search, so that instead of searching all of Flickr, you can search just the photos that have a Creative Commons license. And these tend to be more permissive. And so all of these have said, you're free to use the photos as long as you attribute the source. And so I have down here a little Creative Commons logo, which is the very, very bottom, and then the source where I found the photo, just the URL of that person's. It's actually not even their whole account, but just this particular photo. And so I've got that on everything that I got from Flickr. If I have something in here that does not have something on it, it most likely came from Stock Exchange, which is one of the other sites on there. And that's a free photo site that says you can use these free and clear. Obviously, black on white is pretty good. White on black is pretty good. Dark blues with white work pretty well. And then you get down into like reds and greens, especially for people who are red-green colorblind, that becomes gray. And so then it becomes kind of muddy. And so I stick with the very dark colors. Red does not work well with most projectors, and that's a problem at a school like A&M that has a reddish color as one of its primary colors. Maroon really doesn't come across well on a lot of projectors, and so I try to avoid it or to use it maybe as the text color instead of the background, where it doesn't matter so much if it shades brown or red, because there's just not as much of it. But blues and greens work better on most screens. Yellows and reds are a little bit, it depends a lot on the software and how expensive the projector was. Different monitors project things in a different way. And so one of the issues that we saw was that we had matched our color using the eyedropper. So the text color and the background color matched something in a photo, which the photo stayed the same, but the text rendered very differently when we moved it to different computers. And so it didn't match anymore. One of the most powerful presentations I've ever seen at a tech conference was a guy who had a lot of statistics to talk about. It was not boring at all because he had a story about each one. And so he would throw up a large number, like taking up the entire slide almost, just white numbers on a black background. And then the bottom would say something like this. And so it would be a number like 73%. And then you'd look down and it would say percent of students whose first contact with a university was the application. Like they'd never read a brochure, they'd never looked at the website, that they applied. And that was, we all went, whoa. He had a lot of statistics like that. He'd done a lot of research on high school students moving into college, and he had these numbers that shocked us. And so he made the numbers huge. And then did the explanation and just talked about what that meant in terms of university marketing, how we needed to design our websites for this audience that he was talking about, and how these numbers were changing over just a very short, couple of years. he had things like cell phone use. And so even though it sounds dull to have, white numbers on a big black screen, it was the most engaging presentation we saw the entire weekend, and the guy won the Best of award for the conference. I will say all these principles also apply to web design, poster design, all that fun stuff. And so if you're talking about presenting in different ways other than just speaking, same principles apply.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you very much.